What's up, guys? In today's video, I will be having a discussion with Ron Yorgason, who is an ex-Mormon and does not believe in God or in the Bible. That being said, we obviously do not share the same beliefs, and there are going to be some things he says that I personally disagree with. But the purpose of this discussion is not to have a debate or push back. There is a time and a place for everything, and this was the time for me to just shut up, listen to Ron's faith journey, and build bridges wherever we could. During the last half of his testimony, we had a really good discussion talking about Jesus and where he's currently at on the topic of who Jesus is. Keeping that in mind, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Jesus Stories. Today, we're going to be joined by a special guest. Many of you know him as Masterpiece. Ron, how's it going, man?
Hey, doing very well.
Right on. And real quick, I'm willing to bet that because you're here joining me today, that there's probably going to be an increase of ex-Mormon atheists who are watching this more than some of my other videos. And so, in light of that, I just want to say, if you are an ex-Mormon atheist or agnostic who wants nothing to do with Jesus or religion or the Bible, this is a place for you. I appreciate any sort of respectful and honest pushback. So your questions and pushback are very welcome in the comment section below. Again, as long as it's hopefully done in a respectful way. But anyway, Ron, I've been looking forward to this discussion for a while since we've been chatting for the last couple of weeks and to hear more about your story. But before we get into that, you recently started a Facebook page not too long ago. Do you want to share a little bit about that and kind of what content people can find there?
So, when I left Mormonism, I got really into studying Mormon history and a lot of things that were really fascinating to me. And it just became a huge hobby. So I love uh, seeing the differences in old Mormon history versus what's being taught today and kind of understanding how the church got to where it is and kind of the progression of doctrine and things like that. So I focus on things of interesting Mormon history that people don't really know about. So our church had a very correlated, minimal view of what history was. If it wasn't faith affirming, it was never taught. It was they only give you like this very sterilized view of Mormon history. And so I find all the interesting stuff that they left out. So things that you'll find on my Facebook page are interesting pieces of history that I'm digging up or researching or that I found. I'm a big stickler on verifiable history that's from approved sources or from sources that are more authentic. A recent one that I've just found is one on kind of manipulative missionary techniques that were taught to missionaries in the 1960s. Actually got a podcast that I'm doing with Nathan Hinckley right after this. So yeah, I've got all sorts of fun stuff that I dig up in my studies, and if I like it there, I'll put it on there and see what other people think.
Okay, just podcast hopping. I like it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember. So I did take a quick peek and kind of scrolled through some of the things that were kind of that you posted about. And yeah, I noticed there's a lots of like kind of deeper informative LDS history things. And okay, and I think if I remember correctly, was there also one kind of related to like the wise men following a star? Was that on there too?
Yeah, so I help a lot of other people out with their podcasts. So I go on Mormonish and I do research for other people because I do have an awfully big library. But Rebecca Biblioteca from Mormonish asked me. She saw some of my pictures that I do photography. So I was doing some astrophotography and I'd taken some star trail photos, and she wanted to get something from use some of those pictures to show that the wise men trying to follow a star to get somewhere wasn't a very plausible story because you can see the stars moving across the sky. So trying to follow a particular star, unless you're doing the North Star, which stays in the same place, it's not going to do you much good. So if you're trying to follow a star to the east, it's going to be moving all over as you travel. So it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. So
Sure.
she wanted to use those pictures. So I kind of shared those on my page and
Well, I think your posts are like really engaging and interesting. And so in light of kind of that recent post I mentioned, I think it's kind of fair to give kind of our viewers who do hold to a Christian belief system that you from time to time you post some things that might challenge our beliefs a little bit, right? Yeah, and like the way I kind of view that is that that could be a better opportunity for me to kind of dig into a little bit more of what I believe and why I believe it. But yeah, all that to say that I enjoy checking out your page from time to time. And if that's of interest to any of our viewers, you can check out more of Ron's content on Facebook in a group called Masterpiece Mormon, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And on that note, let's just jump right in. Why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about where you grew up and what your religious background was like?
So I come from a long line of Mormon pioneers. So one of my grandfather lines, on my mom's side, was John Taylor, who was a third prophet of the Mormon Church. On my dad's side, we've got a Swedish pioneer who came across in the 1850s and had 8 wives. So everyone with like the Yorgason last name kind of comes from this one guy there. So I've got pioneer heritage that's really deep. I've got deep roots there. So I grew up in that kind of environment. We left Utah when I was 5, so I grew up mostly outside of Utah, in Wisconsin, and I started my mission in Alaska. Went to Oregon and North Carolina. So I kind of moved all around, but I've mostly tried to stay away from Utah because I could see even as a Mormon that I didn't like the Mormon culture. I liked being more of a peculiar person who uh, was a minority. So I saw my 8 peers that kind of lived in Utah, like, well, we don't do that because I'm a Mormon. And everyone's like, well, I'm a Mormon too, and I'm doing it. So you kind of lose that excuse there. So growing up in Wisconsin, I was one of the few people that tried to stay true to my Mormon beliefs, and I was a minority in the school. And when someone tried to offer me a cigarette or something, I'm like, oh, I don't do that. I'm Mormon type of thing.
Hmm.
And so
Uh,
people kind of respected that.
yeah. So Mission in Alaska, is that as cold as it sounds?
It's pretty cold. I didn't get as far north as like Fairbanks, where you'd get like 40 below or 60 below or something crazy like that. I rarely saw it get much lower than 0. I stayed closer to Anchorage and Wasilla in the winter times. Um, so I saw colder winters in Wisconsin, and where I live now in Idaho, it gets pretty chilly at times.
Okay, like
It's cold.
I was gonna say, so right now, like obviously with Facebook, there's so much social media, missionaries tracking is way far down today. You didn't have social media. Did you tracked in 0 degree weather?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Uh, we had big parkas usually. Sometimes we didn't have the warmest weather or gear on, and you can't really have something over your face. So no matter what, your cheeks are frozen, your nose is running, and you're just trying to do the store approach like, "Hi, we're missionaries from Church of Jesus Christ." Look. We
Oh
would
man.
carry golf balls in our pockets. So when we knock on a door, we just pull out the golf ball and not tap on a door because we don't want to take our hands out of the gloves and knock
Oh
on the
man.
door.
Yeah, if you're wearing those thick gloves, you have to pound pretty hard to, or just kick it with your
Yeah,
feet or something.
yeah, yeah.
So, how was your overall experience in the LDS Church? And I guess what were some of your callings?
I actually had a really good experience. I loved my mission. I served in Scouts, Young Men, Sunday School, Elders Quorum Presidency, Ward Mission Leader a couple of times. My last calling was Elders Quorum President. So that's as high as I got. I never got up to like Bishop or any above that, but those were all the callings that I had, and for the most part, I loved them all.
Hmm. And so, at what point in your life did your faith in Joseph Smith and in the LDS Church start to turn and take a change?
So I had a few friends. We'd moved to Ohio, and I had a lot of dear friends back in North Carolina. Some of them were discussing polygamy on their Facebook page, and they had left, and I was kind of surprised. I had home taught them. That means I would like go into their home once a month and share messages with them or something. So I knew these people very well, and they were very sincere, good people. And I was surprised that they had stepped away from the church. but they were talking about polygamy. I'm like, well, I come from a long line of polygamy. I've studied church history. I've been to all the historic sites. I've got everything that I need to know to help correct these people that have kind of wandered off. So I explained a little bit about polygamy, and they kind of smiled and nodded in their Facebook comments, like, yeah, okay, we recommend you look over, read up some of the, study more on some of this polygamy history. And eventually I did it, and it was quite surprising. There was a lot of stuff that I thought I knew all about, and I didn't know hardly anything. And the deeper I got, the more I saw that, like Joseph Smith marrying 35 women, two as young as 14 girls, 14-year-old girls, about a dozen women who are already married. Most of these marriages happening behind his wife's back, and it was awful. And studied more on. I knew about the priesthood ban and things like that, and I just had heard there was a curse of Cain, maybe things that they had done wrong in the pre-existence for black people, why they couldn't hold the priesthood or go to the temple. But then I was reading Brigham Young's actual statements, and the racism involved in those statements was absolutely awful. And the more I learned and the more I read about some of the things they were doing and teaching back then, the worse things got. And I just like this cannot be something that's divine in any way.
Hmm. And so you did not hear anything about Smith being married to anyone other than Emma growing up prior to your mission. Is that correct?
Uh, I served a mini mission in Wisconsin for 2 weeks. And there we ran into somebody who was from the RLDS Church. So the reorganized church, they broke off, or they found started after Brigham left Nauvoo back in 1846. Emma and her sons and people stayed there, and they started a church maybe the 1860s. Sorry for my dog there.
That's
Uh,
okay.
and so they started the reorganized LDS Church. And he said that they thought that Joseph Smith might have been married to one other girl. Uh, and that was the only thing I'd ever heard until I was 45
Wow.
about Joseph Smith being married to anybody else. So it wasn't from a solid source, it was somebody from another branch of Mormonism. And there's nothing in any curriculum. There was nothing ever taught in seminary or institute classes or anything that I learned. It was never portrayed in any church films. It was always just Joseph and Emma.
So that must have been a huge bombshell.
It was. I had read the Work and the Glory series about 10 years earlier, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of it follows a family from like the early 1800s to early 1830s to the Utah period. And so there's the Nauvoo era there, and there was some stories in there that kind of made me sick to my stomach. So there was Joseph getting the revelation about polygamy and pressuring Heber Kimball and an angel with a sword threatening that Joseph had to teach this. Um, I went back and looked through the chapter again on that era, and the closest they ever came to saying that Joseph was ever married to someone else was two characters in the book commenting on a rumor that Joseph might have been married to somebody else. That was the only thing in that book. Um, so yeah, I never anything about polygamy, but that one little bit that I read from their book about Joseph pressuring someone and the angel with a sword, that did not set well with me, and I just kind of had to set it on my shelf until I was ready to investigate it further.
Sure. And so after learning about that, where did your mind go from there?
I was researching everything I possibly could, and I got to the point where I was probably about 95% sure that the church was false. And finally, I got around to reading the CES letter, and a lot of the stuff in there that I'd read, it's kind of a letter of questions that Jeremy Reynolds had that he couldn't find answers to, and he sent it to a CES Institute's director. It's like a college level professor for the school, and he couldn't get an answer for those. So I was reading through that, and at the end, he posted a link to a video of somebody uh, who collected all these testimonials of people who felt the spirit and knew that their church was true. So they have a girl bearing testimony in a polygamist offshoot of Mormonism where she knows that it was really hard for her to accept this proposal, but as a 17-year-old girl, but she finally prayed and knew through the Spirit that what she was answering this, saying yes to this marriage was what God wanted. Or people from the Muslim church praying that they found a great spiritual manifestation that their church was true, or um, the Apple White, the crazy bald guy who had all his followers commit suicide to catch a
Mm,
passing. Can't remember the name of the group, but
mhm,
he was telling them all to pray in their closets and go find answers from God. And these people were had before they committed suicide, they were bearing testimony that they knew that their religion was true. And so I had had all these spiritual experiences in Mormonism, and I couldn't understand. I'd been taught that that meant that God was answering my prayer and telling me that this church was true. And that was the only thing kind of keeping me in at the church time because I couldn't quite find a way to explain all these spiritual experiences I had while I was a Mormon. And when I saw that and that saw that other people were getting the same kind of messages and how it was really just feelings from inside, something that you kind of elevation emotion, oxytocin type of thing. I did some research on this, and it was if you if there's something that confirms a deeply held belief or something with great acts of courage or love, you're kind of seeing things like this, you get kind of a warm feeling in your in inside, and it feels good. And or if you kind of have this kind of epiphany type of thing where you make some interesting connection, you might get this really strong feeling that this is true. So like when I was studying Joseph Smith's polygamy, I got to the point where I decided that if God wanted Joseph Smith to practice polygamy, if it was really a divine thing, then he would have followed the pattern set in the New Testament, where the angel came to Joseph and Mary and told them that Jesus would be born to them. So they were both on the same page and they could raise this child together in a very proper way. Um, so then I like if this is God's pattern, if he's going to do something like this, but here we have Joseph Smith marrying all these women behind Emma's back. God has apparently changed the marriage covenant unilaterally without telling Emma about it or getting her consent in any way. So like if this was a divine practice, the angel would have come to Joseph and Emma. They could have been on the same page together. They could have taught this doctrine to other people and testified together in the mouth of two or three witnesses. And they could have implemented polygamy in a much more distinguished way, much more righteous way instead of this malicious kind of coercion, threatening type of thing.
mhm,
And as I thought on that, I had this very strong spiritual experience, just as strong as any I had in Mormonism, that this idea was right. If God was really behind Mormonism, behind this principle, then it would have been that's how it would have been done.
mhm,
So I had to kind of understand how this feeling that I had was all the other previous experiences I had. I was supposed to believe that the Mormonism was true, but this one was telling me something very different. So I had to kind of understand what that feeling meant, what all of these feelings that I'd had before. And when I kind of learned that everyone else is experiencing the same kind of feelings, testifying that their religion is true, I kind of feel like, okay, this is not what I thought it was. It's a great feeling. It's a great thing to let me know what I believe and what's true to me. Um, but it's not a reliable source of what is actually true and accurate.
mhm. Yeah, I 100% am on your same page right there. How, people can do wrong things and feel good about those things that they're doing. I mean, that happens. Um, so in the end, it was this kind of video you saw of all these different people having different experiences, I guess the same experiences from different religions, all saying that their individual religion was true. Would you say that was kind of the final straw that broke the camel's back, or was there something else?
No, that was it. That was like I had already learned everything else, and once I saw that, it was just like, well, that's the end of that life. That life that I had is over.
Mhm. And yeah, one thing I try to do, like when I'm talking with people who have left, when I'm talking to people who have left the faith, is any faith at all, is I try to put myself in their shoes and think of how difficult of a transition that might be. Because I mean, I was born and raised in a Christian household, and here I am still, big surprise, I'm still a Christian today. Um, it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around that, about what that must be like, of leaving your childhood faith. And um, and my heart breaks for people who are shunned by it and disowned by family, by friends, and by losing things when they're following the path that they feel is true. They're to the best of their ability, they're making the right decision. They know that this one path isn't true, but they're following another path. And I mean, if someone's claiming to be a follower of Jesus and they're shunning people for going that way, I think you and I would agree that I don't think that's what Jesus would want that person to do.
No, no. So yeah, it's in Mormonism, especially. It's probably in a lot of aspects in other religions and other people's families, but your whole family, your whole community, everything that you've learned in your whole life experience is all based on this religion, all of your major life choices. So I've grew up, I had the whole map of my life planned out for me in Mormonism. And everywhere I go, there's the same kind of family. You have a built-in community wherever you move because it's all the same everywhere you go. But I have all these people that I've known, spent my whole life. I followed their prophetic plan to a T. I went from high school to my mission right away. I came home from my mission, uh, immediately got married, and I'm still in school, but I'm having kids right away because that's what the prophets told us. And we're having a big family, so I've got 5 kids. It took me 6.5 years to get through college because my wife, after our second kid was born, she became a stay-at-home mom. So I'm a sole provider and still in college, working and trying to get myself through school and get my family started. It was really hard. It was a lot harder than my life probably should have been. And what really wore me out is by the end is uh, 2020, where I'm just kind of even going into this before I've come into this faith crisis. I'm super burned out. I had a high demand job. I had a small farm in Ohio that I'm helping my wife run. I have this high demand church that I go to. I've got 5 kids, four teenagers with church activities that I'm taking them to all the time, and we live way out in the boonies, so every church activity is a long drive. And then as elders quorum president, I'm in charge of a lot of the people in the ward, teaching and also just making sure all the health and physical needs are met. So I'm doing a lot of service, move-ins, move-outs. Uh, all of this was building up, and I was just completely burned out. And I was just fantasizing about someday where I could uh, just go to church for an hour and take the sacrament and then leave and just kind of be a low. I just needed time to heal because I was just completely fried. And that's when I hit my faith crisis. And so I'm going through this burned out phase and having a faith crisis
Mhm.
and having my marriage fall apart because I left the church. Because when you leave the church, everything, you get a lot of struggle with your friend relationships, your family relationships. Everything is just all falling apart, and you're trying to figure out how to make sense of the world and view everything. So, because my whole morality and way of understanding the world is all built up and tied into this religion. You make Mormonism a whole part of your identity. So you are a Mormon, and if anybody says anything bad about the church, then that's that's them attacking you, type of thing. So people don't like it when someone leaves the church and says things that they've learned that challenges their faith. So they shun you. They kind of push you away. They don't want to be around you because you could infect them and take away their faith as well. So you lose everybody, and you have to try picking everything together up during this phase, and it's an awful time.
And you have to do that all by yourself, it sounds like.
Yeah,
So after leaving the LDS Church, you still kind of maintained your faith in God in kind of a general sense. And for a brief time, I believe you identified as a mainstream Christian, but that did not last for very long. Would you be willing to kind of walk me through what it was like as you were trying, like attempting to reconstruct your faith from a devout Mormon to a mainstream Christian?
Yeah, so uh, it was I didn't ever attend another church, but when I left Mormonism, I still believed in God and Jesus because I didn't. There's only so much you can kind of process at a time. So as I'm going through and then I'm learning more about how the tools I use to kind of understand Mormonism, I kind of use these same kind of tools to understand religion and in general. And I'm like, well, a lot of these stories from the Bible are old. Their Gospels are written decades later, maybe not by even by people who were witnesses to everything. A lot of these stories, like Old Testament stories, look like they're fables. A lot of them kind of borrowed from other communities that they're around. And so I could understand things from this kind of way of just kind of how lore and stories kind of build up. And I kind of took a Darwinistic idea of religion in general. I could see how religions that were easier to adapt, uh, a group could take over a neighboring community, get them to join them. Community religions that could excite more devotion. The people will be more willing to die for you, so they'll go to war, and they'll be able to better defend or better able to conquer and gather up resources. So the religions that did better at kind of managing these types of things and bringing people in and building a cohesive unit were better at growing really strong and expanding. And so those are the kind of the main religions we have today is like Islam and Christianity. They were really good at kind of spreading and bringing people in and developing really strong adherents that would go to war and sacrifice their lives in the name of their religion. So that's kind of how I took an idea of religion in general. For maybe about a year, I kind of considered myself a hopeful agnostic. So I didn't really know if there was a God or not. I could see that there were a lot of gods throughout the history of mankind. Um, so I didn't know for sure if there was or something, but I kind of hoped that there would be, and that I just wanted to live the best life I could and hope that it was good enough for whatever being is out there.
Mhm.
Um, Eventually, I kind of settled once I had when I left religion, Mormonism, I had to figure out what my own morality was, and this was a really big, important part of my transition. I kind of decided some key things that I felt strongly about empathy for others. So I wanted to care for others and understand what they were going through and be happy when they're happy. And I could see that there wasn't one path for every single person to be happy. So something that would make me happy would make somebody else miserable. And that's fine. We're all different. And so I could just be happy whatever way that they're finding that's a healthy way for them to be happy. So if you're LGBTQ or whatever, mixed faith marriage, that was a big thing that was wrong in Mormonism for a long time. Um, However, you're finding happiness, that's great. And I can be happy for you instead of I don't have to judge people like, oh, you're finding happiness the wrong way. You're a bad person type of thing.
Mhm.
Integrity was really important. I wanted to be honest with my fellow man and how all my dealings, I needed to be forthright and honest and do the best version of all my interactions there. And then for the last one, in Mormonism, everything is a sin. That so if you smoke, it's a sin. You drink, it's a sin. I'll drink caffeine or coffee or tea, anything like this. Everything's a sin and is offensive to God. So I took a rational risk versus reward type of thing. So I could see that drinking can really mess you up if you drink too much. Maybe I could drink in small amounts, or just have like a glass of wine every once in a while. Turns out I don't like most types of alcohol anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. Smoking is always gross. But I could kind of decide based on uh, how much I thought it would benefit me versus how risky the behavior was. And I could decide whether that this is something that I wanted to do, or if there's ways I could mitigate that risk. And I think I was able to kind of teach that, pass that on to my oldest son, who followed me out of the church and lived with me when I got divorced. So I let him make his own decisions and kind of helped him decide on how to make the right decisions and what he wanted to do and what worked for him. And when he went to college, he didn't have like a lot of kids will leave a controlling household and they'll go off to college and they'll like, I'm finally free. I can do whatever that I want. And then find out that a lot of those things have consequences and makes them miserable, or it's really hard if they're drinking and partying every night. They don't do so well in school, but if they kind of have an idea of how to judge the risk versus reward and make better decisions, they can have an easier transition and they can make better decisions in their life. And I think that's an important thing for anybody to raise their children with.
Hmm. Have you gotten the since leaving the LDS Church, have you personally gotten the vibe that people of religion, kind of, or I guess primarily like LDS and non-LDS Christians, have the view that if you're atheist, you can't be a good moral person? Have you gotten that vibe?
I've
Or
gotten told that many times.
oh, okay, wow, by Mormons and mainstream Christians?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Um,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so my moral compass is very important to me, and being the best person. So I can focus on doing things that I can feel that are good. So I can, and in Mormonism, you have thousands of rules that you have to follow through, all these hoops you have to jump through that have no basis on whether you're a good person or not. They're
Hmm.
just they want you to be obedient. So they tell you that the obedience is the first law of heaven, and they give you hundreds and thousands of commandments and rules that you have to follow. And people they'll you get so obsessed with making sure you fit in, you're following all of these rules that you can't help but see anybody else who's deviating from the visible versions of these rules. And so you can't help but judge anybody who's deviating from that. And it's just you become hypersensitive to all these rules. And once I left Mormonism, like I can leave this behind, I can let go of my judgment. Um, I can just focus on being a good person and helping other people, and doing that. And that's a much better way, much easier way for me to live than what I experienced in the Mormon religion.
Yeah, like for me, I'll just say that I fully agree and acknowledge that you don't have to believe in God or in Jesus or in the Bible to be a nice, kind person. Like, I mean, you're evidence of that. You do nice things for people, and you're so do you identify as agnostic or atheist or
Apatheist. So I was agnostic for, as that hopeful agnostic for a while, but then I became apatheist.
Mhm,
So I don't care if there's a God or not, because once I've learned how to manage my own moral compass, I'm not going to ever let somebody else have control over that again. So I'm not going to go to a religion and just let them just tell me what is right and wrong, because I've already decided. If you want something, if you want me to convince me that something is right or wrong, you can explain it to me. And if I agree with it, if you can explain it in a rational way and say, oh, yes, like you can show me that this is a better way to live my life, I will happily adopt that.
mhm.
Um, and then I can manage this and make myself a better person as I go along.
Okay, yeah. So I fully acknowledge that that atheists and people of different religions, doesn't matter what you believe, that you fully have the capability of being a nice, kind person. I think so. People in my camp, I think they might look at that statement and say, okay, yeah, but what is the definition of a good moral person? You know, like someone's definition might differ from another. And who's to say that someone else's, I guess, view on morality is right and Hitler's is wrong, right? So I guess the whole idea of like, is there objective morality, or do you have you kind of conceptualized that at all or processed it?
I think society is learning to do better as we go along. So a lot of people were in the 1800s, slavery was still rampant, and people were justifying slavery through Christianity, the Bible. They say, look, there's rules in the Bible on how we should treat our slaves, so it's okay to have slaves.
Hmm.
Then people kind of developed and recognized that all these people were being harmed, and it wasn't such a great thing, and so they decided that being a more Christ-like person meant you didn't have slaves. So, but I think the Bible is a snapshot of morality back in 2000 years ago or whenever, how far back. And there are things in there that we've learned to do better. And when we learn to do better, we can do better. But some people will hold on to some of these ideas in the Bible and say, hey, this is the only version of righteousness, and I'm going to interpret this stuff in this way. And so we refuse to progress and let other people live their way. They have to live the way that we've interpreted the Bible and the morality that we're pulling back from this, and we're going to try to enforce this on other people.
Hmm. Yeah, the issue of slavery has always been kind of a hot topic for Christians and atheists and anyone else, and reasonably so. And for me, I can just speak for kind of myself and how I've kind of researched that topic is that slavery in the Bible, um, another another word for slavery in the Bible is bondservant. And I, from what scholars have said, slavery in the Bible was very different from slavery in the 1800s. But I know when we think of the word slavery, that's where our mind goes to. And you're absolutely right. Like the Bible has been used as a tool for evil. I fully acknowledge that. And the interesting thing is, when we read about the abolishment of slavery, we actually read it's because Christians said, "Wait a minute, everyone's made in the image of God, and that's why this is so wrong." But it is problematic for why it took so long, why it started in the first place. So it is a difficult issue to navigate for sure.
And there's a lot of great things we can learn in the Bible. I love how Jesus is kind to the women. The woman taken adultery, kind of he was without sin, let him cast the first stone. Or he's very forward and kind of progressive in how he's treating people. He's kind of bucking against the religious group of his day with the Pharisees who've got hundreds and thousands of rules that they're trying to enforce on people, whether it makes them a good person or not, and they're using their rules to justify some pretty awful things. And Jesus is kind of simplifying things down to like, hey, love your man, love God, love your fellow neighbor, lift everybody up, and that kind of thing. So I see the Mormon Church leaning much more towards the Pharisaical type of religion. They think that they're following Jesus, but they've got all these rules and things that don't have nothing to do with whether you're a good person or not. So I
Yeah,
think
no,
there's good examples from Jesus. So I love a lot of the stories in the Bible.
yeah, no, you touched on a point that is one of the reasons that like makes me fall in love with Jesus all over again. When I look at how he treated the outcast, when he treated children who were viewed as nuisances, as when women were viewed as property. The first missionaries in the Bible that witnessed the resurrection were women. And I think there's a reason, like the first person that Jesus started his ministry to, that he told he was the Messiah, the one who was going to come, was the Samaritan woman at the well. Not just a woman, but a Samaritan woman. And it's things like that that's just like, man, this guy was so different out of this world and he changed the world. But like, so on that topic, with your perspective now, what do you think of Jesus? I mean, so it sounds like you have a lot of kind of doubts about the New Testament, what they say about Jesus. Do you just think he was someone who taught some good things that became a legend over time? Where do you go?
Um, I think it is probably something closer to that. A lot of the stories that may be attributed to Jesus may not have actually been said by him. But and some of the things that are attributed to him, I'm not particularly fond of. Like if I come to not to bring peace, but a sword,
Mm,
who leaves his family and all of his riches or whatever will gain 100-fold in life to come. I'm butchering the actual verse there,
mhm,
but sakes father, mother, brother, sister, whatever. I think some of these verses are used to promote warfare and to have done a lot of harm in the world. This particular one about leaving your family it sounds very similar to what many spouses do when their one spouse leaves the church and now they're going to get a divorce because it's better they'll be blessed for leaving this person and finding somebody else who's more faithful they can have this eternal family with.
mm,
So some of these stories I'm not particularly fond of. Some of them I really cherish.
mhm.
Uh, really don't like the story in the Genesis with Abraham sacrificing Isaac or being willing to. I've seen a lot of religious abusers coerce people into doing things that they really don't want to do and just call it an Abrahamic test type
Hmm.
of. So
Gotcha.
there's a lot of things that can be abused in the Bible to convince people to do things that are wrong. But there's still a lot of good stories in there that are quite beautiful. So I
Hmm.
try to pick and choose things that I like and things that will make me a better person out of the Bible rather than just trying to wrap my life based on it.
Hmm. Okay, so here's the last question, and I'm curious. So, from your perspective, with where you're at right now, what would be a few important things that would need to happen in order for you to reconsider Jesus and the Bible? And just to distinguish, I'm not asking like what would need to happen for you to just go back to a church. Like for me, separating Jesus and attending a church, those are two very different things in my opinion. Like I believe it's totally possible for someone to, stay at home on Sundays and have a deep connected relationship with Jesus. So, but for you, what would be a couple things that you would say would need to happen for that door to kind of open back up?
So leaving Mormonism, where I dedicated everything in my life to it, on false pretenses, things that did not hold up, things I couldn't prove, things that I couldn't verify, and then I go through and find out that they're largely fraudulent and lies or stories told. Um, to believe in a God, I would need to uh, have definitive proof that that this is what he wanted, that he was there, type of thing. Um, So it's kind of part of my atheism. So I'm going to live my best life that I'm going to live. And when I die, if there's a God and he blesses me because, rewards me because I've been a good person, that's great. But I didn't need to follow somebody on earth to do it. It was something I could learn and live my own best life to achieve.
Mhm.
If I get to the other side and there's a God and he punishes me because I didn't believe the right interpretation of a story about him, that's not a God I'm interested in worshiping anyway.
Mhm.
So, and if I die and then there's nothing else after this life, then I will be happy knowing that I did the best I could to help people around me and make my community a better place. So when I could say I'm an apatheist, that's why, because I'm going to just live my best life, and it doesn't really impact my how I'm going to live my life if there's a God or not.
Okay, so I lied. This is not the last question. That was not the last question. I have one. I have a follow up because I'm curious. When Jesus said, there was a Pharisee who approached him and he called him good teacher, and Jesus said, "Hey, there's no one good except God." And so basically he's saying, all you guys have broken the law. Okay, you're all sinners. Do you reject that or accept that? There's a little bit of truth there. What do you think?
Obviously, we're all going to make mistakes in life, the things we're going to be proud of, things we're going to be ashamed of. I think the idea of sin and shame and guilt is a tool to manipulate people to get them to do what you want them to do.
Hmm.
I'm not fond of that. I prefer just going by doing the best that I can. I know I'll make mistakes, but I'm not going to think I'm some kind of broken person because I did something wrong or I violated one of my own personal goals. I'll
Hmm.
just try to do better the next time. But I'm not going to spend my time worrying about. And I'll try to make up as best as I can. If I've hurt somebody, I'll definitely try to repay her in any way that I can.
Make amends and whatnot.
Right. So this kind of the steps of repentance that I learned in Mormonism, I'm still a big believer in, except I don't really necessarily believe that I need to pray and gain forgiveness, or I don't need to uh, try to. I don't think that praying and getting forgiveness from a God will make up for what I've done wrong, and I need to do my best to fix it, whatever I can, and that's where I gain my peace and satisfaction is just doing my best and then making up for whatever I can when I'm wrong instead
Hmm.
of I think some people can just say, well, I've prayed and I've asked for forgiveness. I can, I'm fine. I don't need to worry about anything else.
Mm.
Uh, I think that's kind of a dangerous path to live your life by. So I'd rather do my best and not worry and not count on somebody else making up my shortfalls.
Yeah, I can really identify with your last point there of people just simply saying a prayer and thinking, okay, yep, I'm good. I think there is, I'm kind of like I'm with you where there is some truth in the LDS repentance process that there are some good steps in there. Not all of them, but there are some good steps in there. And it makes me think of Jesus talked about how if you have like basically if you're making a sacrifice to God and you're bringing a gift at the altar, but you remember you got some beef with a brother or sister in Christ. Like God doesn't want your gift right then and there. You need to go make things right with your brother or your sister, then you come back. And so clearly, just offering sacrifices to God, no, we please God by loving each other is kind of what I kind of come to believe.
Yeah,
Well, Ron, I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation. As you said, I know you have another podcast that you're going to hop onto with Nathan. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and taking the time to be here, man.
sure. I'm glad to do it. And thanks for giving me this opportunity. I love talking about kind of my path and where I've gone and hopefully help some other people understand uh, what the faith transition in crisis is like, and maybe some ideas on what they can do to help make their lives better when they go through that themselves. So
Hmm. Sure. Before we sign off, would it be okay if I just said a quick prayer to close our time?
sure, I'll do just fine.
God, thank you so much for this time that I've gotten to get to know Ron a little bit better, got to hear his story and where he's at. I pray that wherever he's at today, God, that you would just bless him. That's all I want. Just please bless Ron in his day today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.
All right. Hey, guys. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. And I hope it was obvious that I really enjoyed my conversation with Ron, and I think he's a great guy. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are some things he said that I disagree with. And funny enough, a few of the things he touched on were some of the things that I looked into and examined in the realm of apologetics when my faith was first really tested by my best friend, who was an atheist. Topics like, did the biblical authors borrow from surrounding cultural stories to fabricate their own stories about God? When were the Gospels of Jesus written? Can we trust them as eyewitness testimony? And was Jesus of Nazareth even a real person? That being said, I do plan on doing a couple videos on those topics and list some of the things that I discovered that ended up being really strengthening to my faith during that time of scrutiny. But that is for another video. Until then, thank you so much for watching, God bless, and remember to never stop chasing after Jesus.